All right, welcome to episode 2 of the JP Pod. That's the name I've decided to go with at the moment. If I come up with something more clever later, then we'll see. But that's what we're on with for now. So let's get right into it. Today, there was a big Russian terrorist attack about a couple hours ago. Near Moscow, there was a terrorist attack in a theater. About 40 people are dead, and Russia itself just confirmed 147 total victims. So this was obviously a massive deal. I mean, this is a big attack. One of the biggest in modern times for Russia. Obviously, everybody would think first, who is to blame in this, right? People would automatically assume Ukraine, obviously, because they're in a direct conflict with Russia. But these weren't Ukrainian affiliates or Ukrainian soldiers. ISIS has actually claimed responsibility for this. Russia has come out and through its senators, some senators have obviously openly claimed Ukraine was behind it. That was to be expected, obviously. The U.S. has hinted at possible Russian citizens or a Russian false flag. They said something like, not everybody in Russia likes Putin, which is kind of indirectly saying that this could be people inside of Russia, Russia's citizens, doing this. That seems a bit odd to say this early. But I think it's important to look at it through the lens of who has the most to gain from something like this, and look at it also through the lens of past behaviors and tendencies. Look at it through the Russia lens, okay? Russia has given us no reason to think they would do this to their own citizens. I mean, the whole reason, whether you disagree with it or not, or whatever you think about Russia or its motives behind the Ukrainian conflict, their whole reasoning is, well, the main point for them was their own love for their own citizens, and they believed that there were citizens in Ukraine that were actually Russian. They identified as Russian, they spoke Russian, they had Russian cultures, they loved Russia, and it was sort of a taking back our own people sort of stance. And, you know, when a country has motives like that, loves its own citizens that much, to do something like that, to launch an attack on its own citizens seems a bit contradictory. Doesn't really make sense. Also, Putin just won an election in a massive landslide. He won 88% of the votes, so there's no reason for him to try to prolong the Ukrainian war to stay in power or launch a bigger conflict for political reasons. It wouldn't really make sense for him to do that. I mean, he's been extremely de-escalatory. He used the interview with Tucker Carlson to sort of promote a negotiation, a peace deal, something to put an end to the conflict. And Tucker actually said that off camera, he alluded to him that he wants a peace negotiation to begin. He wants to come to terms. That's part of the reason everybody kind of wondered why he didn't openly bury the West for its support of Ukraine. And it appears the reason was he wants negotiations. He doesn't want to go backwards rhetoric-wise, unlike the U.S., to come to a deal, to come to the negotiation table. So, those are just a few of the reasons why it really does not make sense for Russia to do this to its own citizens. I don't see what there is to gain from this. Russia has openly been willing to put an end to, or saying they're willing to come to terms. So, prolonging an attack, to have a false flag and pin it on the Ukrainians instead of pushing the peace narrative like they have, it doesn't really make any sense to do that. And you look, Putin has had many valid, I say valid, he wouldn't be really blamed by a lot of people for launching a wider conflict with the U.S. and NATO. We've given him many reasons to push the conflict to us. I mean, first of all, the continuation of aid to Ukraine and supporting Ukraine against Russia, also using or giving Ukraine our own weapons to launch attacks against Russia. There's also reports, and Putin alluded this himself in the Tucker Carlson interview, that he believes that there are U.S. special forces and officials in Ukraine, maybe not directly fighting. I mean, possibly, I wouldn't be surprised, but at least aiding Ukraine actually in the battlefield. So that alone is a massive reason to launch a bigger conflict. Again, I'm not supporting this. I do not want a world war, obviously. So I'm very glad that Putin hasn't. But if you look at it, he's had many reasons through Russia's lenses to launch a wider conflict. So he's continued to have restraint. Thank God he hasn't launched a world conflict, because that's what it would turn into. I mean, the Russia versus NATO conflict would turn into China and Russia versus the U.S. Obviously, Russia versus NATO, North Korea, Iran, and all their allies would come in. I mean, it would start a massive fire globally. And Putin has constantly said he doesn't want that, and his actions back that up. So it doesn't make sense for it to be Russia to launch a false flag like this, and then for ISIS to claim respect. It doesn't really make sense through the Russia lens. You look at it through the Ukraine and the U.S. lens, I kind of merge them together, obviously, because they're fighting this war against Russia together pretty much. They have a much higher logical motive. Possibly trying to probe Russia into a wider conflict, I think, is going to be the main reason that people think Ukraine and the U.S. was behind this. I mean, it makes sense, right? If you look, the people who are getting rich off this war in Ukraine, I talked about this last episode, the military-industrial complex, they are getting extremely rich off this war, and they are bloodthirsty. I mean, they constantly want conflict. And we have, for some reason, we still have this massive grudge with Russia. It's like we haven't left the Cold War. So our continued despite and our continued hatred of Russia, I believe there's a lot of people in Congress, or in the shadow government, I like to call it, the people who are making decisions behind closed doors that aren't in the public eye. I mean, look at Lindsey Graham. He uses every chance he can. Any instance that happens, he loves to use it to claim that we need to be directly fighting Russia. I mean, there was that one clip where he was talking to Zelensky and he was like, when Russians are dying, it's a good thing. That is crazy to say publicly. I mean, to say that against another global superpower is insane. So they've given us, the U.S. politicians have given us many reasons to think that they want a direct conflict with Russia. I mean, if they didn't, they would put an end to this Ukraine conflict. They would come to peace terms with Russia, and they would stop obsessing over having Ukraine and NATO, having weapons right on Russia's border, having access to Ukraine to put possibly our own weapons on Russia's border. If they're a NATO ally, we certainly are within our rights to do that. So if you look at that way, the U.S. alone has more of a logical motive to somehow stage this, get this horrendous attack to take place. Obviously, they won't be stupid enough to do it directly with Ukrainian soldiers. They would probably do it through somebody else like ISIS or anybody. I mean, it's the whole thing is just really fishy, okay? How many ISIS or terrorist attacks have there been in Russia lately at all? Like, this is not a common thing for Islamic terrorists to launch attacks like this in Russia. I mean, Russia has had a anti-terrorist push, a really strong one, to keep this stuff at bay to where it doesn't happen. There's not really a big Islamic terrorist setting in Russia in general. So it's extremely odd for it to be ISIS, which makes you think somebody is probably using them to push an agenda. And I really think, obviously, the Russians know who's behind. I mean, with Russian intelligence, I wouldn't be surprised if they already know who's behind it and are already conducting plans to respond. I mean, Russia never goes the emotional route. Let's just start bombing people. Let's start, using tactical nukes or whatever. They're more surgical, quiet, but deliberate and ruthless. And they will get to who did this, and they will do what is necessary and nothing beyond that. So don't put it. I mean, the U.S. does this all the time. They use other proxies, other people to push their own narratives. I mean, look at Ukraine. Ukraine is a perfect example of that. There's many other examples of, look at the Bay of Pigs, right? We love to get inside and get people to do our own jobs for us without us directly doing it. I would not be surprised if this was another reason for that. I mean, the U.S. has used ISIS to do its own agendas in the Middle East before. So I wouldn't put it past it for the U.S. to do something like this, to use a group like ISIS to launch an attack like this. So another thing that's really fishy about this, the U.S. gave advance notice with eerily accurate descriptions of possible sites for a terrorist attack. They advised U.S. citizens in Russia to stay away from theaters, concerts, malls, public settings for 48 hours. That was about 2 weeks ago, I think it was. And where did this attack take place? In a theater, in a mall. That's very fishy and eerily accurate, right? So why would the U.S. do that? Okay, let's say a hypothetical, the United States was behind this attack, okay, through ISIS. Why would they give advance notice? To try to cover its tracks, I would assume. But to do what they're doing right now with Russia, to say, hey, we warned you. Well, you guys didn't want to listen to us, which is really messed up to do. These are Russian citizens. And it wasn't even a notice to Russians. It was to U.S. citizens in Russia. So they're going the route of, we warned you, sorry. And then saying, we know not everybody in Russia likes Putin. It seems like a very specific, deliberate response, a strategic response. And that makes me more suspicious. I mean, this just happened hours ago. I believe more is going to come out behind this. Obviously, ISIS has already come out and claimed responsibility, right? So, right now, there's no reason to believe that the Russians were behind this. And there's really only two more options. And they're kind of merged into one, the U.S. and Ukraine. And I think the most logical point at first is to try to bait Russia into a wider conflict. So, obviously, this is fresh and raw, like I said. More is going to come out. There's going to be a lot of theories about this. But I would urge you to look at it through your own lens. Don't listen to what the prepared responses are from, like, the U.S. Look through it through your own lens of, okay, who would gain the most from something like this? Who has the highest motive to do something like this? And like I said, I really find it hard to believe Russia would do this to their own citizens, especially through ISIS of all groups. I mean, that's just very, I don't see that adding up. So I don't expect the Russians to have a very emotional response. I mean, if they did, they would probably already start launching tactical nukes at Ukraine, and there would already be a massive response militarily. We don't have that yet. The Russians are going to do this very deliberately, smartly, strategically, and deliberate response. Handle the problem, do it what's necessary, nothing more, nothing less. That's what they've done throughout that's what they've always done throughout history, right? So I'm not going down the World War III path with this, obviously. I mean, we'll see. I don't think the Russians are going to push this further and have a bigger response than what's needed. So horrendous attack. I mean, this is one of the biggest terrorist attacks in Russian history. I mean, you got 40 dead, 147 injured. That's a very big response. And there's some very gruesome videos out already of the attacks. So it's horrible. It's horrible. Okay, next topic. I wanted to get into Israel a little bit. Blinken made a trip to Israel. I believe it was yesterday. And Netanyahu basically said, thanks for the trip and everything, but we're going to go ahead and go into Rafah no matter what, with or without your help. With or without your funding, we will do what's necessary for our military objectives. This is probably a big red flag for the Biden campaign, right? For the Biden administration. When you have Israel not bowing down and doing whatever the U.S. wants, it's very contradictory to what Ukraine is doing or what was doing. I'm going to get into that a little bit. Zelensky is sort of following this path with certain things, surprisingly. But Netanyahu deliberately saying, thanks, but no thanks. We're going to go ahead and do it. We'll take your funding. If you don't want to give it to us, then we'll go ahead with it anyways. The U.S. is losing its grip on Israel. Israel is going to do what it needs to do to defeat Hamas, to complete its military objectives. And if the U.S. wants to help, great. And if they don't, then they're going to do what they need to do anyways. I think that's a big that's a very good sign for Israel's sake, right? They're not going to blindly follow the U.S. and do what the U.S. says, right? They're going to do what they think is best for their people, for their objectives to defeat Hamas. And obviously, you've got Biden on a hot mic after the State of the Union saying, me and Bibi are going to have a come to Jesus meeting. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to give it to him. And we're going to hash this out and he's going to do what we want him to do, right? Doesn't appear to be working, right? Deliberately saying we're going to go ahead and do this with or without you. I bet you that Blinken was stunned. I don't think he expected that. Maybe he did. But with this conflict going forward, this will be something to keep an eye on. The Biden administration versus Netanyahu. I wouldn't be surprised if they've already got plans in the works to replace him with a coup, potentially. I don't know. Don't put it past the U.S. to do that. You could argue that Netanyahu is using this conflict for political gain to stay in office, stay in power, right? But then you can also look it through the lens of they're doing what they need to do, right? Hamas started this. Israel's going to finish it. I will say there were some very troubling videos that came out of innocent Palestinian teenagers being hit by drone strikes and tragically being hit. Obviously, I do not support the killing of innocent civilians. Do I think this is a widespread issue? I'm not too sure, right? I don't. What I know is Israel has dropped leaflets and given Palestinians advance notice to get out when they are launching attacks. I do not think on a wide scale that Israel is trying to kill innocent Palestinians. Do instances like that happen? When they happen, are they tragic? Yes, and I do not support it, and I think that's disgusting and awful. Do I think it's a widespread issue that Israel is trying to ethnically cleanse Gaza of Palestinians? I don't. I think horrible instances like that happen. Again, the cold response is this is war and stuff like this happens. It's not good. I don't support it. I think it's horrible, right? I don't think this is a widespread issue of Israel deliberately killing innocent civilians. I think the innocent civilians that do die most of the time is Hamas putting them in harm's way and building bases under hospitals, schools, places with massive gatherings of innocent civilians underground, and Israel giving advance notice, Hamas not letting them leave. We talked about that last episode. But videos like that come out are very chilling, upsetting, and I condemn that. I don't think that is happening widespread. That innocent civilians are deliberately being killed by Israel with drones. and who knows, I'm not trying to defend what happened, but perhaps they thought that they were suicide bombers. I don't know. I believe they were moving towards Israeli troops. They were kind of running towards Israeli troops. Not defending it, obviously, but like I said, I do not think this is a widespread issue of Israel committing genocide. Obviously, if this was the case where Israel was giving no advance notice, was just deliberately wiping out innocent people, I would not be supporting Israel. I would say that needs to stop immediately. But the evidence shows that Israel is going above and beyond, trying to not kill innocent civilians, trying to get them out of harm's way, and Hamas is stopping them from doing that. So I don't think there's a widespread reason to think that this war in Gaza is not directed towards Hamas and eliminating Hamas. I don't think that's the case. I think war is awful when innocent people die, and it doesn't help when the opposing military, I guess you call it, Hamas, is using them as human shields. So, all that to say, it's good that Israel is not caving to the pressure from the United States and from everybody. Everybody is pressuring Israel to halt this permanent ceasefire, let Hamas stay as it is, and obviously I don't like seeing innocent people die. Obviously that's not something I support, but Israel's not to blame for it. Hamas is mainly to blame for it, for putting them in harm's way. So we must continue to let Israel do its job and do what it needs to do to get rid of Hamas for its own people, for its own safety, because Hamas has already proven that it cannot stay as it is, because October 7th will happen over and over again. So I would say this is a good sign from Israel's standpoint that they're not caving to the U.S. I want to talk a little bit about Zelensky as well. Zelensky kind of did something similar to this, not as public. When the U.S. tried to get them to stop hitting Russian oil fields, and Zelensky just kind of said, yeah, we're going to do it anyways, which is kind of crazy. U.S. is completely funding your war. I mean, it's a nice breath of fresh air that Zelensky isn't demanding more money from us. It's nice that he's standing up to us a little bit. I mean, I wish the war would be over already, but perhaps this is a sign that Israel and Ukraine, that they're not completely bowing down at the U.S.'s feet. It kind of appears that the U.S. is losing its grip on Ukraine and not really gaining a grip on Israel. Could this be a trend towards the U.S. losing its control, losing its power over these countries? I mean, like I said, they never really had much of one to start with Israel, but Ukraine has been the United States' puppy, pretty much. They do what we say. We pay the war, you do what we say. And like I said, it's nice to see Zelensky kind of break that trend a little bit. I mean, I hope Zelensky's not gonna push for peace negotiations, so it won't go that route, I don't believe. But could this be kind of an illustration of where things are going? Is the U.S. losing its power or losing its control over Ukraine? Perhaps. I don't think we're any close to a peace deal, though, unfortunately. But it's just something to keep an eye on. Something to keep an eye on. If this trend continues, it could be a dangerous route. The U.S. losing its control and power over countries, things could get ugly. Events like today in Moscow, perhaps, or near Moscow. But it's just something to keep an eye on, something to watch. Hopefully it pushes us towards pushing this. If it pushes this conflict towards peace, I don't see that happening, but we can always hope, right? I want to talk a little bit about the border invasion that's continuing. There was a clip in Texas of migrants ripping open wire, pushing past the Texas National Guard and Border Control agents, and going up to the fence and banging on the fence and let us in, let us in. Those aren't asylum seekers, okay? If you see in any other country or any other setting, large groups of people barging through the border, barging through the fence, and past National Guard members and banging on the next fence, what would you call that? Would you call those asylum seekers? Peaceful asylum seekers? Or would you call it an invasion? I would lean towards the latter. These aren't the picture perfect immigrants that the left likes to portray. Like, these people are just asylum seekers. They're begging for a new start, and you monsters won't let them in. You won't let them get that fresh start. How dare you? These people are innocent people seeking asylum. I mean, they flat out ripped apart the barbed wire and the razor wire on the fence, on the border. It was violent. And it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Like, oh my gosh, these are the people that are coming into our country. These aren't peaceful people looking for a new start, looking for jobs, looking for a better life, and are gonna work hard and be model citizens. These are people who are demanding in our country violently. What are they going to do when they get in here? If these people are prone to violence like this, should we be promoting letting them in our country? There's a legal, peaceful way to come in our country to seek asylum. And it's not barging through and ripping open a razor wire fence and pushing past Texas National Guard members, right? This is very troubling. And it's something that the leftists continue. They do not care who they are, who these people are that are coming in. Let everyone in. Everyone needs to come in. So videos like this just illustrate more of who is coming in our country. Like I said, these aren't the blue collar people looking for a fresh new start for their kids, fleeing places that are, places like Haiti right now. These people, they're not coming grateful of the opportunity to be here. They are demanding they come in. They are violently demanding that they come in. This should be very worrisome for any U.S. citizen that these are the people coming. And you won't see that on CNN. You won't see that on MSNBC. You may see it on Fox. You'll see it on places like X, where people will push those videos out that the mainstream media won't talk about. I mean, some people may use the word invasion, like trying to, politically or whatever, talking about the immigration crisis. That was directly an invasion-like scenario. Foreign migrants tearing apart. I mean, nothing will happen from this. As long as the Democrats and Joe Biden are in power, nothing will change, unfortunately. We just got to pray and hope that something drastic doesn't happen before Trump gets in, if he gets elected. And I mean something very bad, like a terrorist attack from within our borders. I mean, there's already been videos of Hezbollah terrorists getting caught at the border, well, first off, and then videos of Hezbollah terrorists, documented Hezbollah terrorists, saying to independent journalists, asking them where they're coming from, saying, "You will soon know my name." That is horrifying. You have known terrorists, documented terrorists coming in our country openly. Come on in. And they're saying to us, "You will soon know our name. You will soon know my name." I just pray and hope that something bad doesn't happen before we can get these people out. Because all of the laws that Trump had in place to deport these people out of our country, Joe Biden got rid of it on day one. And is blaming the Republicans because they won't pass bills that will... The border is not an issue where you throw more money at it. Okay, it has all the resources it needs. You just need to let the border agents do their job. I mean, there's countless border agents saying that how guilty they feel. They're not allowed to do their job, and they feel responsible for all the people that are coming in our country. You have to let them do their job. You can't handcuff them. And on top of that, you can't get rid of the policies that were working that got rid of all the people who... It seems kind of common knowledge if you are an illegal immigrant and you're not supposed to be here in the first place and you commit a crime while you're here, you need to be sent out. But those are the policies that were gotten rid of by Joe Biden on day one. This was a priority from him. On day one, he got in office. He got rid of those policies. What does that tell you? His priority is to let as many people in and keep as many people that are in here. I don't care if they're terrorists. They will vote for me, so let's keep them here. So, like I said, I'm just praying that something doesn't happen, because if Trump gets back in office, I feel like that... Well, I know because he said this. That will be a top priority for him to reestablish those policies that got these people out of our country. So, I'm trying to think of a positive way to spin. There's no positive way to spin this. It's just something that you need to be aware of. These are the people in our country. And like I said, just pray that something bad doesn't happen. Just pray that something doesn't happen where these people who are in our country don't decide to do something terrible and horrible. On a different note, Candace Owens has left the Daily Wire in a very public dispute with Ben Shapiro. This was kind of weird. It was kind of a weird split. But I was going to use this to say this is kind of more of a sign of where the media is heading. I mean, the Daily Wire isn't a corporate media company of the likes of Fox, MSNBC, and CNN and such, but it is sort of it's more of a sign of independent journalism and, settings of podcasts and settings of people kind of speaking their mind freely without having to answer to anybody. That appears to be where journalism and the media is pushing more towards. I mean, you have people like Tucker Carlson, Chris Cuomo, and now Candace Owens. I think you'll see this a lot more of independent journalism. It's trending upward. And we have people like Candace Owens who are leaving places like the Daily Wire. I mean, the Daily Wire, of all places, is a very conservative and open place where you can say what you think. Even people at those places are seeing that the independent journalist route is better for them. So I think that's a good illustration of where media is going. I mean, corporate media is losing its grip on controlling the narrative. I mean, maybe not with everybody, but I think widespread people who get their news from places like X, where they can hear from independent journalists and see it for themselves. They don't have to see it through the filter of the mainstream media and what they decide to show you. They can see raw footage of it and make up their own minds on it. So I think it's a very positive trend, because it just pushes freedom of speech, first off, and freedom of information. That is a big part of living in a democracy, is having freedom to have the full information, the full story on things. And I think, especially if you're living in a politically polarized state like the United States is right now, and the corporate media is playing the politics game just like the politicians, if not worse, I think any route where independent journalists can provide information unfiltered, uncontrolled, just the raw truth, what they think on it, but also letting people decide what they think on it, I think that is a breath of fresh air from the toxic places like the corporate media, where it's nothing but a game and I got you game, and there's no progress being made. There's no freedom of information to let the viewer decide. We're going to tell you what this is and what to think, and if you think otherwise, then stop watching, pretty much. So I think this is a good sign towards that direction. I think Candace Owens will do great. Obviously, she has a massive audience, so I don't think she'll have any trouble. Doing things on her own instead of being with the Daily Wire. What's pretty interesting, Ben Shapiro seems to be making a lot of enemies within the conservative field. Tucker Carlson and him have had a very public beef for some reason. But yeah, I think that's all the topics I wanted to cover today. Thanks for watching. I'm going to try to post videos pretty regularly on here. Podcast videos like this with clips I'll upload to X and YouTube. If you're not following me on X, you can follow me at JP_pod10. I'll be posting the podcasts and the individual clips on there as well. Yeah, thanks for watching. See you next time.